Hello, and welcome to Conversations Worth Your While, a show in which I chat with authentic experts about interesting topics to spark, inspire, and motivate personal and professional change. Today's topic is the ripple effect of leadership. And this conversation is worth your while because as soon as we wake up, we're leading someone or something. Every action, every word, and even every thought has a ripple effect on those we're called to lead. So it's critical to be aware of how we show up as leaders. But often we get too busy to pause and look in the mirror to discover exactly what we're sending out. And you know what? The world has changed and the economy is still changing. So now is the time to use the shift that has occurred during the COVID halt to give momentum to the change of being an authentic, courageous leader. This is your opportunity as a leader who impacts thousands and maybe even millions of lives to live and lead authentically. And today we're going to talk about the biggest challenges that impede leaders from making the ripples that most positively affect and impact change and transformation. And then we're going to share with you how to move through those challenges so that you can make the big, beautiful ripples that you are here to make. So let's start with some introductions. I am Linda Bucher, and I believe that each of us has very important gifts to share and that we are meant to make big, beautiful, positive ripples in the world. And these are ripples that only you can make. And I coach, lead, mentor, and teach. And that is how I light the way for you to give those gifts to the world and make those big, beautiful ripples. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by fellow ripple maker, Ilka V. Wilson of Corporate Gold, which is soon to be Ilka International, where she helps world leaders grow to achieve their full potential. Welcome, Ilka, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Linda, for having me. Such a joy to be here with you.
Thank you. Can you tell me and our audience a little bit more about who you serve, why you do what you do, and why this topic is worth your while to share with us today?
Well, thank you again for having me. As you mentioned, I'm Ilka Wilson. I have a company called Corporate Gold, soon to be Ilka International. And who I serve are C-suite executives, world leaders, presidents of countries. And why I do that is because a lot of times we reach a certain point in our lives where we think we have reached a ceiling, but there's more. There's more, the great impact that we need to make. No matter where you've been, how high you've climbed, there's always someplace else to go. There's always another level we need to reach to make an impact.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I also believe that not only are we here to make these big, beautiful ripples, but they're not happening at the level that we're at. We do need to level up in many ways. We need to level up in our knowledge, in our experience, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. We need to level up if we're going to make the biggest impact. And we're always evolving. And it's not only something that we are called to do, because if you pause long enough, you'll realize you are called to do it, each one of us. But because we have been given this gift with, like what Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. So we have the responsibility to give these gifts to the world, to make these ripples, to be a part of the change for the world in a positive way. So it's very beautiful. And I love meeting and chatting with fellow ripple makers. So I'm very excited for our conversation today. So today our topic once again is the ripple effect of leadership. The first thing we're going to cover are the challenges that impede leaders from making the ripples that most positively impact change and transformation for our world. So Ilka, I'm going to walk through some of these challenges and I just invite you to share your expertise. So I think one of the first ones that comes to mind is burnout. I know I was in a job that I had loved and was so excited for. And then after some time, I discovered that I was having trouble getting out of bed and getting my butt there. And I was typically 45 minutes or an hour late to work every day because there was just some part of me that was like, oh, I just can't do this anymore. I don't want to, and this, and it's so interesting because the duties hadn't changed. The people really hadn't changed. So, this burnout was just occurring. What are, your thoughts about burnout? Maybe your experiences or experiences of any of the clients that you've had.
Mhm. So one of the important things to note with that is notice what you're noticing. Like you mentioned, you noticed you started going to work late, you had disinterest. So there was something pulling at you. I have a friend, his name is James Cooper, and he says, you will move forward when the gravity of your future becomes heavier than the weight of your past.
Oh, I love that.
And
I'm gonna write that down.
I will repeat that again. It's by James Cooper. He says you will move forward when the gravity of your future becomes heavier than the weight of your past.
Oh
A
my
lot of
gosh.
times we
Mm-hmm.
go through exhaustion. It's sometimes because we're not operating in purpose.
Right.
We're operating where the entire world has told us, my mom, my dad was a doctor, I have to be a doctor. My mom, my dad was a lawyer, I have to be a lawyer. I need to be a degreed person. Oh, I spent 15 years going to medical school, I have to be a doctor. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a boy or girl inside of you saying, no, I want to be a chef. No, I want to the world and help the poor.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I
And
frequently, sorry, go ahead.
now I was saying, imagine that, and you said something that brought me to something I share all the time is we all are an individual piece of the puzzle, the
Mm-hmm.
world puzzle. And if we don't complete our piece, the puzzle is never complete. And yes, you may have been a president of a country, C-suite 500, Fortune 500 executive, but you may not have completed that piece of the puzzle that's yours.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think there's a part of us that knows when we're not doing that, and that can also impact that burnout that we're feeling um, as we're following the path we had set for ourselves years ago. But what happens is we're changing all the time. And what we wanted 10, 20 years ago isn't what we want today, because the person we are today is not the person that we were 10 or 20 years ago. And so it may have been a beautiful choice at one point, but we experience this burnout when we get out of alignment with who we truly are, which happens when we don't stop to ask ourselves who we truly are. So,
That's correct.
something that happened to me is our next challenge that leaders face is John Maxwell, you shared, said, it's when you've climbed the ladder, you're on the top of the building and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm on the top of the wrong building. I completely had that experience. I was 45 years old, and I remember, thinking, how did I get here? I was climbing the corporate ladder out in search of following. I actually, the way I put it, and I actually wrote a book about it, is I was chasing someone else's definition of success. That's what was happening. Some definition that I have absorbed or synthesized based on my parents, my peers, my professors, whatever, that all came in there. And I realized that what I had been working towards wasn't even what I wanted. And I never stopped to ask myself what I wanted. So now, I have clients that the exact same thing's happening. I've been achieving and achieving and achieving, and all that I've achieved is not fulfilling. It's not fulfilling to me. I climbed and I got here. I've arrived, but I've arrived in the wrong place. This isn't the place that's for me anymore. I'd love if you would share your insights.
Yeah, and that is absolutely right. It's like, where am I? But the critical question that if you peel back, the real pain is, who am I? Right? You arrive to that place and you're asking yourself, who am I? Yeah, I have millions of dollars, I have millions of followers, but you're still exhausted. You're not feeling right. And it's almost like there's something not connecting. The dots are not connecting. Things are not flowing. There's something not feeling right.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep asking, where am I? How did I get up to the top of this building? When did all this happen? 30, 40 years have gone by, 5 decades have gone by. And now you're telling me I came to the wrong building? How do I go back down?
Mm-hmm.
That
Well,
seems impossible.
oh, but it's not. You and I both know. And we'll talk about that in the second half of our
So
broadcast
it's,
today.
and I'll give you one quick example is for myself. I was an elected official. I was in the top level in the federal government. I thought I had my career all together. I thought I had my family all together, and it all went in 2014, 2015. It
Mm-hmm.
just blew. So imagine that.
Yeah. Well, often, and I have similar experience with when the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, it's often the very best thing that ever happened to you because it makes you
Yes,
stop
sir.
and um, and reevaluate where you are and where you're going, and to look back on your past, not for
Mhm.
its difficulties, but because if you look back at all the mountains you've ever scaled, they look beautiful from this vantage point. They're really scary when you're on them and you're scary, you're like
Mhm.
tentative handholds and footholds, and you look up and go, it's so far to the top. And you look down and you go, don't look down, it's so far. But when you look,
Mhm.
if you had like a little rear view mirror and you could see all the mountains you've already climbed, there's so much beautiful experience that can be used in so many different ways.
Mhm.
So if you are in our third challenge, if you are seeking what is next, but you have no idea what it is, some of the answers are in the past experience that, when I'm helping my clients through this, we're finding that your what's next has to revolve. And I say this, maybe someday I'll be famously quoted for it. When you wrap what you're doing and how you're doing it around who you are, happiness and success will meet you there. That's the place where that happens.
And
So, when you are seeking your what's next and you're just unsure about what it is, that is very painful. And I remember being in that place, and I was in that place because I didn't know who I was at the core of me. I didn't know who I think it's Carl Jung who says we spend the first half of our lives trying to be who we think we're supposed to be. And then we've got this second half of our lives. And this is where, when I was 45 years old, we start questioning, like, wait a minute, who am I? And we can either go into a midlife crisis, which you and I know have discussed, and we can talk about that a little bit. But it doesn't have to be a midlife crisis. It's either going to be a midlife crisis or a midlife awakening. It depends on your choice. For me, it was a midlife awakening, a total awakening. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I'd love if you would, share your thoughts on, seeking what's next, not being sure what it is, but getting to this decision point.
I think that's critical, right? So there are three critical questions to ask. Where am I? Where am I going? But the most important one is, who am I? Because I spent decades being somebody else, what we call the imposter syndrome, or trying to meet what the world or your family or your community said this is who you were, but you've been fighting inside. It's been a turmoil. You're continuously having that turmoil of figuring out, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Then you
Yeah.
get to that place. And I can tell stories of that, because the critical piece is when you ask those questions, depending on the answer that you give yourself, it could be, as you mentioned, a midlife crisis, it could be a crisis, or it could be the best things that happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Decisions because you pause, you look yourself in the mirror. It's not easy. It takes a long process, and you need accountability, you need support as you
Absolutely.
do that process.
Yeah.
It's not something you do alone, because you need somebody to, I had a boss, he talks about the world needs truth serum. You need someone that gives truth serum,
Mhm.
and that respect them enough to know that they're not guiding you wrong.
Right. Yeah. You know,
Mm.
I remember actually saying out loud, no one was home, but I said it out loud anyway, with conviction. I said, I don't know what life I'm meant to be living, but it sure as hell ain't this one. I knew that with such extreme certainty. And that was the most important pivot point in my life, because that was the point at which I was going to say, which way am I going? But even more than that, it was a point in that moment. I set such a powerful intention for change. And without that powerful intention, you're not going to make the change that you're here to make. You're not going to be able to make those big, beautiful ripples. So if you discover that you've been living the wrong life and what you're doing is not in alignment with who you truly are, this intention place is a really important place to be.
And it's a decision making, right? It's funny because one of the first conferences that I spoke at during that pivot point was a conference by my first lady in Virginia at the time. And it was, I had to change.
Mm-hmm.
So that came up, I had to change. But what did that change look like? That change could be a place of growth, or that change could be a place of shrinking. Beware.
Right.
Beware your decision. You have to look at them and see, is it a place of growth, or is it a place of shrinking? When I say shrinking, are you trying to recover what was, or are you trying to build, like you mentioned, from the rear view mirror and see all the mountains I've climbed? Yes, this one looks different. It's a different height, right? Because as you rise up, as you go to different levels, it looks different. But what tools did I gain to really begin climbing this new mountain?
Yes.
Make intention that I will climb it and I will get over it. I've done it before. If you look at your life, so this is a different question that comes up, but all through your life, questions have been coming up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the last big challenges, and it's not last because it's least by any means, it just happens to be on my list that way, is leaders often cannot lead to their full potential and make their biggest, most beautiful ripples because they have unresolved hurts and belief systems that are limiting them in some way. And you talked about this growth that we want to have, and that requires going within. And it's part of it is discovering who you are. And sometimes when I work with my clients, we always start, that's not quite step one. That's, step 2 or step 3, somewhere right in there is who am I? So I can find my wow, align with my purpose, and discover what's next. But at the very core, the very first thing we always have to do is repair someone's sense of worthiness. We have unresolved hurts, and we have belief systems that are tangled up with that soul shrapnel, I'm going to call that. And that, if we don't, sometimes we're not even aware. Sometimes it's more at a subconscious level. We're not even aware of how we show up. And that these unresolved hurts or these belief systems that we've been given, that we've incorporated into our identity in some way, are actually impeding us. And so looking within is one of the most important things to do, and to repair with help and support, because most people don't already know how to do that, to repair their sense of worthiness, but to repair that sense of worthiness so that you can show up fully, authentically yourself and without hurt. I mean, it's always going to come up. We're always evolving, obviously. But the real big ones, that, if you know your triggers, there you go. There's some hurts under there, some belief systems that we need to work through. So that's a huge challenge. Do you run across this
It is.
even at the level of leaders that you work with? You find this as well, don't
Yes.
you?
Yes, I definitely do. And the important thing with some of the leaders that I work with is they realize that, once they start working through the process, they can say, wow, I now see it in my mom, or I see it in my dad, or I realize that the thing that's been holding me back to living my full potential was something that happened at 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was molestation or somebody told me, don't do that, or said, you're never going to become someone.
Mm-hmm.
Interested that as my life started to fall apart, but I said it wasn't falling apart, it was coming together. In 2016, I went to a conference and the title was Know Your Worth, Own Your Truth, and Embrace Your Power. And there's a key to each piece of that, knowing your worth.
Mm-hmm.
How valuable are you to the world? This has nothing to do with dollar signs. This is to do with how valuable are you to the world. You are more than the money you make. You're more than your title. You are that piece of the puzzle that if you don't complete it, it will never be complete.
Mm-hmm.
Owning your truth, the truth that I buried, whatever that trauma may have been, abandonment, divorce, separation, adoption, whatever it may be, abortion, whatever it may be, that you buried that, but now it's time to face that and heal from that.
Mm-hmm.
You have climbed the ladder pretty high up, but at some point it's going to come up. And when you deal with that, you can now begin to be, that powerful, full person that you are meant to be in this world. So it's know your worth, own your truth. And once you do that, the power that explodes from that is nothing compared to all the power you've had right now as a leader of a country or a leader of a Fortune 500 company. It's nothing compared to that.
I completely agree.
And it's worth the effort. It's worth the work. Do the work. There's no whatever paradigm you've dealt with about going to health, going to mental health. We all need to take care of our mental health, not just our physical health. That's part of our body. All the pieces of our body has a function.
Yeah, I agree. I believe that the world and those we love deserve the best of us. And we cannot show up our very best selves when we have unresolved hurts, when we have belief systems that are limiting us, when we have insecurities and fears and doubts, when we are not in alignment with our true selves, and when we are not feeling 1000% worthy of love, attention, and affection that is so not tied to what we do for a living or how much we make. When all those things happen, this is the path to the type of wholeness that can help leaders make the biggest, most important impact. And by leaders, we're not just talking about world leaders, we're talking about anybody, because what we said earlier is everybody's leading in some way. As a mother, I'm leading my children, right? So
right.
as a coach, I'm leading my clients. As a show host, I'm leading the audience in some way. So we have many different roles that we lead in. And this is the path to being the most effective leader, which really means making the biggest, most important positive impact and ripples on the world that we can make.
And if I may add to that point, Linda, is in 2016, I started writing a book called What Leaders Say and Do, How to Inspire You. And that was the reason why, because I realized I needed to heal. I needed to go through a certain process to be able to inspire my first tribe or my children. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with the leadership in the community, leading in my business, my work. It was all about starting with my children.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to make that tough decision to start the healing.
Mm. You know, I have the similar thing. I was miserable in the corporate job that I was in because I had reached burnout, but more importantly, it's because I finally discovered that I was so out of alignment for my true self that that's not what I was here to do. I was not here to be an IT project manager. That was not, my bigger purpose. And
Mhm.
I was in a place of discordance. And when I discovered what my bigger purpose is, I'm a widow, and my kids were 3, 5, and 7 when my husband died. And so they were just a few years older than that when I made this big life decision to quit the
Right.
high paying, important job, and, go back to school to become a coach and then eventually a master coach. And it, I decided, people said, well, that's irresponsible. You have 3 children to raise and you were making a good buck, Linda, and doing, good. How can you just go back to making $0? Like, that's not responsible. And I thought to myself, no, that is very responsible, because showing by example, living by example, that if you're unhappy, the change starts within you, and the belief that you can have that what you want starts within you, and you've got to discover the way. And that's all inside work. So it's about taking personal responsibility. And I started teaching my children that happiness is an inside job, 100%. And then the legacy that I leave with them is, if you're unhappy, you can do something about it at any age. I was 45 years old when I made the change. And if you're out of alignment, which is usually a big part of your unhappiness, you can also make that change. So it was my responsibility to demonstrate that and to leave that legacy for my children so that they can make a bigger impact in their lives, because they saw that example. Because their kids are not going to listen to what you say, but they're watching very closely what
You do.
Yeah, what we do.
What you do matter more than what you say. You can give service, but if your action and your words are not coinciding, Houston, you have a problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, Ilka, this has been a wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much for being on Conversations Worth Your While and talking about the ripple effect of leadership. And I know you've got a book. I know that maybe there's some other way that people can get a hold of you, talk a little bit more about leadership with you. How can they get a hold of you?
They can reach me by sending an email to Ilka, ILKA, at corporate-goal.com. And they can just send an email. I offer also 30-minute strategy sessions to discuss, if you may be one of those who are going through these pain points and want to have further conversations, you can send an email. If it's urgent, you can always call me too at 571-359-8370.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ilka and I are very similar in how we help our clients work through those challenges. And one of the things that I have that I'd like to share is I have a little ebook that's just free on my website, lindabucher.com/success. And this ebook is actually a workbook, and it's about attaining success on your own terms. So you can discover a lot more about who you are when you fill out that ebook, and you'll discover a lot more about what true success means to you if you were to shed the definition of success that you've been chasing all your life that was given to you, and actually build it from the inside out. So that's what that resource will help you do. It's totally free. I will put our contact information and our resources in the description, so that you can go there and grab what you would love to have. And once again, I am Linda Bucher, shining my light to help you make the big, beautiful ripples that you are here to make. And I'd like to thank Ilka V. Wilson of Corporate Gold, soon to be Ilka International. Look out for that. And I'd also like to to thank you, our audience, for sharing your time with us today. So please subscribe and remember to check the description where you'll find our contact information and the free tools and resources that we're gifting you. And until next time, make sure that you've made this conversation worth your while by sparking the fuel that it ignited.